So we're on Ayin Tes Amar Aleph by the two dots. Machar Ashba Machar Zav. Right, this is the Mishnah gave a list of all things. When you sell a chamar, you sell its child, par yudat, whatever. Then the Mishnah continued. If you sell a garbage dump, it goes along with what's inside of it, the fertilizer. If you sell a bar, it includes the water. You sell a beehive includes the bees. And if you sell a coop, it includes the doves. Zaktumar, Tanan Hasam. Kol haroy lemizbeach. We're going to get back to our Mishnah. It's going to take us a couple of minutes to get till we get back to what the point is. Tanan Hasam, Kol haroy lemizbeach v'loy lebedek habayis. Lebedek habayis v'loy mizbeach. Loy lemizbeach v'loy lebedek habayis. We learned in the Mishnah in Me'ilah, there's a din if something was hukdash, it became kaddish, and was makdash it, he consecrated it for the Beis Hamikdash. Now you could be the three levels of how you could be makdash something, which the Rashbam goes through. Number one, if you have a cow could be brought as a carbon or sheep. So the din is, first of all, you have to be makdash it. You can't just be makdash if it's a tamim, it doesn't have a mum, and you want to give it to the mizbeach, give it to the Beis Hamikdash. You can't say I'm going to give it to the bedek habayis. They'll sell it and they'll buy with it, pay the electricity bill. It must be used for a carbon. Not really relevant to us, but once we're saying this. Secondly, you can donate things that will physically be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Right? So if you have, let's say, gold, you use it to repair the kalim. So you could donate your gold, and then it will be kaddish lebedek habayis to be used to perform maintenance, to fix things in the Beis Hamikdash. But finally, there are things, let's say, like fertilizer. If you give it to the Beis Hamikdash, they don't use fertilizer in the Beis Hamikdash, but it could be sold, and then the money will be used to buy karbanos or to fix up the Beis Hamikdash. So that's what this mission is talking about. Kol haroy lemizbeach, meaning, let's say, like a sheep. Lebedek habayis, you can't use it to fix up the Beis Hamikdash. Lebedek habayis v'loy lemizbeach, or it could be used for fixing up the Beis Hamikdash, but not, it can't be used as an actual carbon. Or even loy lemizbeach v'loy lebedek habayis, like we said, even the fertilizer that you donate that can be sold, and then the money used. Moyel and bahen, what you donated to the Beis Hamikdash has a din of me'ilah, meaning that there's a specific din. The Torah says that if you have hana from something that was hukdash, that was donated to the Beis Hamikdash, you have to pay back the cost of the value of the hana, of the benefit that you got, plus you have to pay a fifth, and plus you have to bring a carbon asham. All those things will apply on this thing that you donated, whichever level it was, that you're going to have the din of me'ilah, u'b'masher b'seichen. And not only for the thing that you gave, but even what's inside of the thing that you gave. Kate out of the Mishnah immediately explains what that means. Hektish bar malei mayim, or ashbas malei zevel. Someone was makdish, a pit that's full of water, or a garbage dump that's full of garbage, of fertilizer, shayvach malei yoinim, or a dove cat that's full of doves, sada malei asavim, a field full of grass, ilan nosi peris, a tree carrying fruit, moilim bahen u'b'masher b'seicha. It's going to include not just the actual object that you donated, but also what's inside of it, like a pit full of water, or even what it's carrying. If you donated a tree, it will include the pears as well. Aval, higdish bar, but the Mishnah continues. That's all when, at the time you donated, the accessory or the ancillary, the thing that's inside of it or that's growing on it was not there, was there at the time. But if you donated a pit, and after the time that you donated the pit, later on it was filled with water, you gave a landfill, and then later on it got full of fertilizer. You gave a dove cat, and then later on doves joined. A tree and then afterwards it grew fruit, or a field that afterwards got filled with grass, Yehuda says the chiyuv of me'il will not extend to what later on came after the point at which you donated the primary thing. If it later got filled or grew on it, Paris or asavim, those will not be included. They will not have a din me'ilah on the stuff that came later. Seems pretty obvious, right? You donated a pit, you didn't donate the water that came in later on. And there's a big machlokes rishonim about what exactly is the issue with things that came later on or things that grew. Either there's some rishonim who say that if it grew later, it means, if let's say a fruit grew later on something that belongs to Hegdish, even though it belongs to Hegdish, since it wasn't donated to Hegdish, it doesn't have a din milah, right? Let's say you have a tree, right? You donated the tree, and something grows on the tree. Who does that belong to? At that point, it belongs to Hegdish. So the tree belongs to Hegdish, so it grows on it should also belong to Hegdish. So some Rishonim say those fruit, even though they belong to Hegdish, they don't have a din milah because they weren't donated. They just grew. Some say that it doesn't belong to Hegdish at all, since it's really Hefker. Hegdish doesn't have the ability to be kainit for the fact that it grew on it or something got filled in it. But in any case, the bottom line is, Yehuda says these things are not going to, is not going to be a din me'ilah on things that later on came later on after the primary donation. Yehuda Aimer Hamakdish Sada Vesailan. Someone who is makdish, he picks two of these cases, right? He says if you makdish a field or a tree, he says no, something that grows on it, there will be a din milah. Because they're growing in hektish, and just like the actual thing was hokdash, so it grows on it is going to also become hektish. Tanya, Amar Rebbe, Niron divrei Rabbi Yehuda bebar b'shayvach, v'divrei Rabbi Yosi b'sada v'ila. So we had said, Rabbi Yehuda had said his din. It seems he wasn't. He said in all these things. Rabbi Yehuda said that if if I'm looking for the right word, the secondary part, the secondary, let's say the mayin, or a tree that grew fruit later, either one of them, he says, if it came later, it's not going to be hektish. Rabbi Yehuda seemed to say that in any case. And Rabbi Yosi said, so Rebbe is saying that Rabbi Yehuda seems to be right by the case of a pit or a kat, which is a pit that later filled up with water, a dovkat that yoinim came later. So these are not something that's growing. It's not intrinsic in a pit that it's always going to get water, or it doesn't come from the pit. It came from the rain. The rain fell down and filled it, but it wasn't a product of the bar. So he says Rabbi Yehuda seems to be right. That what comes later is not part of hektish, and therefore there's no din milah. The div Rabbi Yosi b'sadavila. Rabbi Yosi seems to be right. Legabe something that grew. If you have a field and asavim grew later, or a tree that fruit grew on it, while it belongs to hektish, so that which grew from something of hektish, also is going to have a din of hektish, and it's going to have a din of milah. So Haimai. Bishlam and Iran div Rabbi Yehuda b'bar v'shayvach. So I can understand that Rabbi Yehuda is chaylik. Not only is he chaylik on bar v'shayvach that he says it's not going to be part of hektish, it's not going to have a din milah. But he says the same thing like Abi Sada v'Ilan, like we said before. Either he feels that there's no me'ilah on something which wasn't donated that grew on itself, or it's not even part of hektish, even though it grew. That's we can understand such a svar. Elinora and Divrei Rabbi Yosi b'sadav ilan. But from the fact that we're saying that it seems Rabbi Yossi is right only in the case of Sada Ilan, B'chlal the Palik Bavar V'Shoivach, that seems to indicate that he's chaylik, even on the cases. Rabbi Yossi, who says you're going to be chayiv on what comes later, he's not just saying it by a fruit that grew on the tree, but he's saying it even by a bar that filled with water later, that water is going to have a din of hektish that has a din mila, even though it didn't grow from the pit, it came from the sky. But that doesn't seem to make any sense if you look at what Rabbi Yossi said. Rabbi Yossi Sadav Ilan Kab. Rabbi Yossi had specifically said his din by a Sadav Ilan. If you look, Rabbi Yossi, I mean, Hamakdash as Sadav as Ilan by Ilan and Bugdilay. Rabbi Yossi says you're going to be chayiv what grows in a field or what grows on a tree. So that's less of a chiddush than a pit or a shaivach. So he seems to be saying, I'm only saying my din by a sada and a tree. So how could we say that it seems like Rabbi Yossi is correct in the case of the sada and the tree? Rabbi Yossi seemed to indicate that he only said his din by sada and the tree, and he didn't say his din on a bar v'shaivach. Maybe you want to say L'dvar Rabbi Yehuda Kama. Maybe Rabbi Yossi was just saying, Hitaka does argue on the bar v'shaivach, but he was just saying, I'm answering you, Rabbi Yehuda. That you, Rabbi Yehuda, had said your din, both by a shaivach, a bar and a shaivach, as well as a sada v'ilan. So he's coming to tell you that even according to you, you should at least be masking to me by a tree that grows something after you donated it to Hegdish, that what grows from it should have a din mila. It came out of the actual tree that you donated. If you want to say that, we have a brisa that where Rabbi Yossi explains himself, and he makes it clear that he's not saying just an argument that Rabbi Yossi. It's not Rabbi Yossi just saying to Rabbi Yehuda, you should be masking to me in the case of a tree, an Elon, and a Sada. But he's saying my reason is I'm Rabbi Yossi, and the only place where I'm chaylik on Rabbi Yehuda is by something that's growing, by a Sada and Elon. Because what grows in it is Gedulei Hektish. So it's Masha B'Sada V'Elon Hudeinu Raya Hababai V'Shavach Raya. So you see that Rabbi Yossi clearly seems to be saying that he is masking to Rabbi Yossi by a bar v'shayvach. So Gemara, no, that's not necessarily what it means. Hachi kamar. Nira and Divri Rabbi Yehuda l'Rabbi Yossi b'bar v'shayvach. She'af Rabbi Yossi l'nachal kalav ela b'sada v'ilan. Al b'shayvach ma'idile. So we have to change what our Mishnah was saying to conform with what we said over here with this price. That Eina Chanami. When Rabbi said Nero and Dibri Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't mean that he's saying that Rabbi Yehuda is correct and Rabbi Yossi is incorrect in the case of Bar B'Shayvach. What he's trying to say is that Rabbi Yossi is maskim to Rabbi Yehuda. We've clearly shown, both from our brisa and from the way the brisa explains it, that Rabbi Yossi only was chaylik on Rabbi Yehuda in the case of Asad of Elan, where the secondary hektish is growing out of the primary hektish. But a bar v'shayvach, where the secondary hektish just came there, the bar, water fell in, and the shayvach, the yoinim flew in, there he would be maskim to Rabbi Yehuda that what comes after the hektish does not become hektish itself and have a din bila. So I was saying that when we said Rabbi said that Nero and Divri Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't mean that Rabbi Yehuda is right and Rabbi Yossi is wrong in the case of Bar B'Shevach. But rather Nero and Divri Rabbi Yehuda li Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is maskim for Bar B'Shevach. Rabbi Yossi nechal kolav ela b'sad of Elan. Rabbi Yossi was only chaylik in the case of a sad of Elan, what actually grows out of the hegdish. It's going to have its own din hegdish. But in Bar B'Shevach is going to be mighty. Tana Rabbah. In fact, the Gemara brings a brisa. Hegdishan rekonen, ba'ach kach nismalu. It's going to sound very much like the case that we had just discussed in the brisa. If someone was makdish an empty, well, we'll see what we're talking about, either a pit or shaivich, he gave them while they were empty, or he gave a tree that didn't have any fruit on it, or a sod that didn't have any grass. And after you makdash it, it became full. It got the water in the pit, or it got the fruit on the tree. You get mi'ilah on it, but you don't get mi'ilah on what's inside of it or on it. So this sounds like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon Af Meilim b'Masha b'Soichen. Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon seems to say like Rabbi Yossi, you get mi'ilah on what's inside of it. But clearly, we still have to clarify, are we talking about a bar b'shayvach, or are we talking about a sada v'ila? That wasn't clear in this price. Amar Rabba, so Rabba says, machlekes b'sada v'ila. This machlekes that we're bringing now in the brisa is all talking about in a sada v'ila, which is which works out well with what we had said. We had said before, according to Rabba, we had come to the conclusion. I'm sorry, I don't know if it was Rabba. In the original Gemara, we had come to the conclusion that Rabbi Yossi is maided to Rabbi Yehuda by the case of a bar v'shayvach. The machlekes we had said is only between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda from our original brayso. So it was only in the case of an ilah, sad of ilah. That's where we have a machlekes, whether something that comes later is also going to have it in milah, but something that came on its own, everyone would agree, and it's very sensible, right? You donated a pit, and then water fell into it afterwards. Rain fell into the pit afterwards. How would it get it in milah? We're going to see later in the Gemara that there is a way such a thing could happen of a pash. So it makes sense. So now when we have a second brayso that says a machlekes from two different tanaim, the Gemara Rabbah suggests l'chayra the machlekes is the same as the machlekes that we had between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, where they were only arguing by Sad of Ilan. Rabbi Yossi says it will come, what grows later will have a din milah, and Rabbi Yehuda says it does. So we're saying the same machlekes over here. The Tanakama says that you're moilin like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon says you're not moilin like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon says you are moilin what comes later. That's talking about again by Paris that come later. That's like Rabbi Yossi. So machlokes b'steilin tanaksama savala Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon. Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon savala Rabbi Yossi. Av bar b'shayvach devei akol moilin. But by bar b'shayvach devei akol, you're moilin by on the bar b'shayvach itself. A moilin ma'asher b'seichem. There's not going to be milah on what growth comes later. Amalei Abaya asks on Rabbah. The brisa continues, right? The brisa had started off hekdishan reikana. You makdish something that was empty, but the brisa continues hekdishan malayin. If you makdish, let's say, if we're talking about a bar v'shayvach, means malay mayim and malay yainim, or hekdishan malayin, you makdish a tree or a sada. The tree was full of fruit, or the sada was full of grass. The Tanakama says there is milah, both on the primary thing and the secondary thing, because you gave it, when you gave one, the other thing comes along with it. Those are Rav Shimon Machlef. And Rabbi Rav Shimon is on this thing says the other way around. He says there's no milah, even though you gave it full, and at the time that you gave it, it was there, right? Let's say I'm not telling you whether we're talking about the tree or the shayvach. We're just giving examples. Let's say you're talking about a shayvach. You donated a shayvach that was full of yainim, or you donated a pit that was full of water, or you donated a sada with grass on it, or you donated a tree with fruit on it. Rabbi Elazar Shimon, in this case, in the Seifa, is going to say let's say you gave a tree, the fruit that's on it at the time you donated it is not going to be hektish. So how could it be that if we're talking about a sada of ilan, that you gave a sada full of asif, or a tree that's full of fruit, that the fruit and the grass is not going to be considered to be milah if someone has enough of it? So Ella Amar Rabba. You have to say, so Rabbi says, I have to be chayz on what I said. It worked out nicely to say that this machlokes Belazar of Shimon was the same as the machlokes earlier. But now I'm going to have to say nafa fakat. No, the machlokes is specifically by a bar v'shoybach. Al v'sad of ilan divrei akol moilim by. Both of them are going to agree that you're mi'ila. U'b'masha moilim b'mahen u'b'masha b'seich. So now the Gemara says it still doesn't make sense. We still haven't really explained things. So we've proven it doesn't make sense to say that this machlokes in the seifa of the brisa, of the second brisa, is going to be talking about a bar v'shoybach. But we're saying doesn't make sense the machlokes by Yesod of Ilan, because how can then we say Elazar of Shimon say by Yabar that the Tanakam is going to say that you're going to be chayiv by Yabar v'shoybach, that stuff comes into it later by Reikanan and by Malay, and the Rebbe Elazar of Shimon is saying it's not going to be. So we're going to switch it around. We're going to say the machlokes is by bar v'shoybach al b'seil divrei kol moelam. Now we still have to understand what is going to be the machlokes by a bar b'shavich reikanim. That the Tanakama had said that it's not going to be included. It's not going to have it in Milah on what fills it up later. And now Elazar Shimon is all of a sudden saying a new shita that we hadn't seen before, that when you donate a bar, and at the time you donate it's empty, and then later on, Rebbe Elazar Shimon is going to be saying that if it fills up with water, that water now all of a sudden is also going to have a din hektish and a din milah. So the Gemara is going to explain, but my pligi, or my pligi, and what's going to be the machlokes when it's full. So Dr. Mar, for Reikanan pligi, so we're going to understand the machlokes Reikanan pligi plukta the Reb Meir Rabban. It's going to be dependent on the second machlokes. The Tanakama Savalak Rabbanan, the Amri Ein Adam Makna Dava Shalaba Elai. We're talking about where a person donated this bar, and we're understanding that when he donated the bar, his intention was to donate what's going to come into it later. So the Tanakam, who is chaylik on the Elazar of Shimon, and says when it's reikon, it's not the water that comes in later on, even though the owner of the bar intended to also give the water. He's going to say a person is not makna davish lo b'alayim, since the water hasn't come yet. Even though it's his intention to add it, it's not going to be added. Elazar of Shimon savak Rameya dama adam makna davish lo b'alayim, and Elazar of Shimon holds like Rameya, who says an adam is makna davish lo b'alayim. So his intention to include the water or to include the yainim is going to include it. And this is obviously a very hard thing to understand. How do you say a davar shalom ba'olam that should be kani now? Who's being kani? It's that this is water that's coming from the sky. Where does this person get the right to be makna something that he doesn't have any rishus on it? So there's a re that says very chiddush pshat. He says that the person who's giving the bar is saying, I'm not being makna this bar. It shouldn't be kani until the water actually falls. So even though I'm saying I'm giving this bar to hektish now, what I mean to say, I want to facilitate the donation of the water that comes later, or the yaina that comes later. So I'm doing it in a fashion that the bar does not become the property of hektish until the water comes in or the yainim come in, and at that point, so it remains mine. I'm kind of the water, and at that point, that's when everything goes through at one time. That's the reach out.
That means it's your moil. In the meantime, it's not a meal.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so how does it work? How does he retain partial rights in it? He's keeping the right to be kind of things. Well, you're right that he should have a din mi'ila. I think that's why the other Rishonim don't learn like that. The other Rishonim had different pshatim that say that what's happening is that hektish is being the davar by la'olam, where he's giving it to hektish, and there's an anticipation that it's going to come. So hektish is able to be kainet because of his wanting to be kainet. Allah Isha. was it the Taisus? So that's why they have this whole long Taisus that explains what the Svar is like. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the Svars were. I'm sure it's on the bottom of the art scroll. Maybe if I get a chance, I'll research it again in my Masifta Gemara, and I'll tell you some extra Svars. But we have the Risvara, then we have the general Svara that doesn't go so far, like because of the problem that you said. And it says that the machlekes is just whether you could be makna davar shel ba'olam, whether this when the person gives his donation, does it also include the intention to donate what's going to come later? Where did Meir say such a svara? That's talking about someone donated, someone sold the classic case of davar shel ba'olam. Someone sold a tree, and he says, "I want to sell the peiros that are going to come later to someone else." Or he sells to someone, "I don't want to sell you my tree, but I'll sell you the peiros." So there, according to the Mandam, it says you can currently sell something that's going to come in the future. Davidi asu, a decal tree is going to have peiros later on. But hanimi yemid asu. But over here, we were talking about the water that's going to come into a pit, or the yonim that are going to come into a dovkat. It's not a natural, it's not a physical, biological fact that water is going to come. The bar. We're talking about where it is. No, it's talking about a case where it can be expected. This is a bar that gets filled up. You have a gutter system that sends. You have ditches that sends you water from your chutzner into this bar. Or and he has his own shayvach nearby, so that he has where he has yoinim in it. So they're naturally going to go to the nearby empty shayvach. So that's going to be what the machlokes is. So we're going to say it could be a mataka machlokes in Remeir and the Chachamim and the Rabbanan about whether you say davar shel ba'olam is going to be kani, and therefore that's going to be the explanation even by a bar and a shayvach. The Tanakama of Rav Shimon ben Elazar would hold that when it's raken, when it's empty, there's going to be a din me'ilah on what later fills it on. In fact, we had the exact opposite machlekes when at the time you donated it, it was full. How can we say by Malayim they're being chaylik, and Rav Shimon ben Elazar is going to say you're going to be put over there? There's not going to be a din me'ilah. Bar stam. We're talking about where he didn't say that how he wants to be makdish. He said, "I'm just being makdish the bar." Rav Shimon holds like his father. Means in the first case we're talking about where he said, "I also want to include the water." But here he was makdish at stam. He said, "I'm just giving a bar." And Rav Shimon holds like his father, like Rav Elazar. The Amud Don and Din Gavayim he didn't hedge it. That we learn from Ligabi the din of being makdish something. We learn it from the din of when you sell something. Madin henit matzi amar biri zavinalach mayim mayeloi zavinalach. Just like we say Ligabi someone who sells a pit, it doesn't include the water inside of it. After Gavaya bir agdish mayeloi agdish. So we're learning it out from the din of when you sell a pit, and it doesn't. If you sell it stam, it doesn't include the water. So the same thing is going to be ligabi when you're makdish. Back to Gemara, it didn't have yet loy. Is it true that if you sell a pit, it doesn't include the water? But we learned in the Mishnah earlier. We just had it a couple of days ago that when you sell, that's what our Mishnah said. When you sell the pit, machabar machamevav. Finally, getting back to our Mishnah that we had ignored for so long. So the din of Hedyot is exactly the opposite. You're saying you learn out Hegdish from Hedyot, but the Hedyot is the other way around. So Gemara, Amarava Masisin Yechidahi. No, our Mishnah is just a sheet of a single person. The Tanya Machabar Loi Machamem. Rav Nasan Machabar Machamem. Our Mishnah is representing the sheet of Rav Nasan, but the Manda Amr over here of Shimon Rav Elazar of Shimon, who says that by Hektish it's not going to include the Meimav. We learn that out from Hedjit, from the case of selling, and by selling, the Chaylik on Rav Nasan holds when you sell the bar, you're not Meicher the Meimav in it unless you specify that you're including the Mayim. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll start the next parak.